So this beginning section isn't that different to what we had before. We have moved positions so Christopher is more in the middle, and that meant that he had to come onto stage earlier, so here he is now. We wanted to make sure he was on stage as early as possible, I guess, because we needed to get him to the other side of the stage first of all, but we also didn't want Christopher to ever be off stage, because this story is all about him and it's his journey. So here we have Christopher and the lady more central and more kind of obvious in it, so that the audience didn't pay too much attention to the building as opposed to Christopher. But I think we still have the problem of the building being more in the middle and us being off to the side a bit more. So we needed to work on that. At this point, because I don't particularly know what I'm doing, I'm kind of walking around trying to find the best way. And then here, because I pick up the wrong leg and my arm gets caught, the lift doesn't work. So we need to work on that transition a bit more and figuring out where I need to go to make it work. But after that bit, it hadn't really changed at all until we get to the bit just after the train station. So from about here, we've added more onto it, and we wanted to create a kind of dreamlike state with Christopher here, so like falling gently into the lifts and then getting out again, as if like he's being carried everywhere and he doesn't really know where he's going. But I think it is a bit too long and he's kind of travelling everywhere and it looks a little bit messy, and we're blocking him most of the time as well. So until that point, it works fairly well with all the lifts, but we just need to think about where we are and if we want 3 of them at that point. So here we are now in the train station. We're actually onto scripted bits with the policeman and Christopher. So for this bit we did look a fair amount at the script, but because there is virtually no stage directions, it was all up to us as to what we were doing. And because it was all about Christopher and the policeman, with the odd little additions of other people like an ATM and a ticket man, we needed to figure out what we were going to do with the rest of us. So we decided that we'd kind of stand in a semicircle around them, because in the actual thing, they never went off stage, and it says that at the very beginning of the script. So we decided to stick to that and make sure that we'd never go off, so we'd all just stand around the edges kind of looking in on them. So we had a bit of a more acting side of it with Christopher and the policeman to start off with. And here you can see that Christopher's character has developed quite a lot more, because he's more authentic, I guess, as to what Christopher would actually be like. But even then, in the section just before, he still hasn't been developed as much as we possibly should make him. So either we have to make it more obvious that he's in a dreamlike state, and the fact that he has no control over whether he's being touched or not, or whether we make it a bigger reaction when he is touched. I'm not sure yet. This section goes on for quite a while with no movement, so I think possibly either we'll have music in the background, or potentially leave it as it is but make it more of a big thing that it's all stopped and this is suddenly in reality and he's kind of like he's realised what situation he's in and everyone's just kind of staring at him, I guess. But I think if we're going to stick with it in this sort of way, we'll have to make it like the differentiation a bit bigger. So here, as you can see, we've got a more physical bit that we've developed, like creating the ATM, like Frantic would actually do, because they use very few props. They kind of use people to create the props, I guess. So we decided that we'd create the ATM for Christopher to use and have someone sticking their head out talking as if it was a real person. We decided to do this because it says voice 1 in the script, so we knew that we'd have to have someone being the ATM, and we decided rather than just having one person stood there, we tried to create the actual look of it as well, to make it partially more realistic for the audience, but also allowing the audience to get into Christopher's mind a bit more, that it's not just this kind of machine that he's interacting with. It's potentially like a real thing that he's trying to look after, I guess, because he doesn't relate to people as much. He relates much more to animals and potentially even machines as well. And then here we've got another little physical bit that's coming up with creating the desk for the ticket office. I think overall it works fairly well, but I think it just isn't quite there yet in the whole physical movement and being as slick as it could be, because I feel like often it looks like we don't particularly know what we're doing or know exactly where we're going and what's happening next. I think partially having people learn lines will be better, because then there won't be scripts and as much gaps in between. But I think just going over it and over it to get the style that we need to make it a bit more effective would be very useful. And then here, after that is all done, we wanted to, because Siobhan comes in, we wanted to make it a bit more kind of mythical, I guess, because it's in Christopher's head. So we made sure to get her onto two people's shoulders to make it higher up, to show that she has a higher status than Christopher, and she has a big influence on him. Before then, though, he's meant to bump into someone, which he did. He bumped into Maya, but it didn't look very good because obviously it was very fake, and I don't think we'd gone over it much at that point. So we definitely need to go over it a lot more and make sure we know exactly what we're doing, because otherwise doing something in frantic style when you don't particularly know what's going on, it can look very chaotic and often really bad, because it takes out all the fluidness that's needed to do a physical theatre piece effectively. So we really need to think about that more and make sure that we go over it as much as we possibly can to make sure that it is as fluid as it needs to be to make it effective. I think we also need to have a look at all the physical pieces that we've got and try and adapt them a bit more to make Joel the centre of attention, and to make sure that he's not lost in it all, as it quite often is with the lifts where we lift him up. Because we need all the people around him, he gets blocked until he's in the air. So I think we'll either need to accommodate it to try and get rid of a few people and make them a bit lower down to make sure that the audience can see him at all times, or we need to make a bigger thing out of it and make sure he's completely covered and then he's suddenly lifted out of it. But at the moment we're a bit of an in-between, so it doesn't look very effective because you can kind of see him, but also you can't completely, so it's just not very effective, and it takes away from the effect of having Christopher being the centre of attention and having everything revolve around him. I think up till now, that section that we added on, that was a fairly easy one to devise just because it wasn't as frantic and we didn't have to play about as much. We could just get two people in the middle kind of actually acting, which is what we're used to. But often in those bits with those two small little physical bits of us creating the items, it needs to be done to a bigger degree because we hadn't done that before until that point. So the audience might not really know what's going on until it's actually interacted with. So I think if we're going to keep them the way they are, they need to be bigger so that the audience doesn't get confused as to what's going on and why we're creating these things around him.